So let's get in touch with our bodies. Well, as much as possible is what they'll say. Because frankly, there are some days that in the morning, all my body says is, help, why are you doing that? No, really, our bodies do actually tend to communicate far more than what our words communicate. Modern communication theory states that between 65 and 70% of what another perceives about you has nothing to do with the words you use. It's how your body position and stance is toward them as you speak, and what you do with your body, whether deliberately or inadvertently, while speaking with them, that they are reading and making judgments about you. It's also oftentimes the most misperceived type of communication, as many cultures have different trained perceptions about what your body should do while you are speaking. Some are just basically tied to the biological and fundamental flight or fight response for someone who feels unsafe or in a dangerous situation. So we're going to take a moment now and take a look at some of the things that our body may say, whether we want it to or not. Let's take a look at body stance. The position of your body while speaking with another person has a major impact on the way that they're going to perceive what you are saying to them. Two primary types of body stances are open stances versus a closed stance. Open stances tend to be those who, as you're talking with them, their hands are at their sides. They make grand sweeping gestures with their hands or body while they speak. Their motions tend to be very deliberate. They move from one place to another only to make a point, and they're always facing with their body toward the audience or the receiver. Closed, and these type of people with an open stance tend to be perceived as more open, more adventuresome, more deliberate. They're oftentimes perceived as the leader type of personality that others are going to follow because they're big and grand in the gestures that they make. Closed stances tend to be more, they're perceived more as those who are shy or deliberate or introverted because they're not as open and grandiose. Arms folded across the chest, hands held behind the back, hands in their pockets, standing further back from who they're speaking to, standing slightly off to one side, not looking the receiver directly in the face. These are all viewed as closed stances or defensive stances. Now, for many years, we were taught that these were defensive stances, particularly arms folded across the chest was viewed as a belligerent or deliberate act. Yet modern interpretations tend to be that this is not a deliberate act of defiance or closing off the body, but for those for whom they are very tactile and physical in the way that they interact with the world, who may be feeling threatened, this is actually closed arms folded across the chest is actually more of a response of giving themselves a hug and feeling more comfortable in the situation by drawing into a safer sphere. By being aware of that type of stance and mirroring the stances of the person with whom you are speaking, whether open or closed, they will feel more comfortable with you. There are also formal versus casual stances. Formal stances tend to be more rigid. Again, they are perceived as more of the leadership type of personality. These are the people who stand with their arms either at their sides or behind their back. For my two children in the military, it's the version of parade rest with hands clasped behind the back. Even in the military, as you work with those who have been in the military, when you watch them standing at rest, different branches of the military have different assigned ways of standing at parade rest. So my Airman First Class daughter teases her Marine Lance Corporal older brother about whether or not the shoulders should be raised or lowered while standing in that formal stance. Casual stances tend to be those who hands in pockets, particularly hands in back pockets, more of the almost what you would perceive teenagers being as the flippant devil may care, leaning against the wall while they're talking to you stance. These types of stances actually tend to indicate more of a sense of comfort around someone else, because now the natural defenses of hands up, shoulders up, in a position to respond immediately to a threat have been removed, and they've placed themselves into a situation that if a threat were to come, would take much more work to get themselves physically prepared to respond to a threat. They have, in a sense, dropped their defenses around you. Watching how certain body parts react can also show much about the person. It's been said many times that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And the eyes can give away quite a lot about an individual, positively and negatively. So let's start with the positive things you can learn about someone by watching their eyes. As you have a conversation with someone, as you ask them questions that require them to recall or describe or present information to you that has to be brought back from their memory, watch their eyes closely. Individuals who prefer to be in a visual environment and to see what they are learning, their eyes will temporarily glance up, and oftentimes to the side that's their dominant hand. What they are doing is visually creating in front of their eyes in their imagination either the recall of the information or what they are going to say, or both. Recalling the information and how they're going to tell it to you, and are recreating it in their eyes before they create the words to say it. If the individual you're speaking with, you ask them to recall information or describe something, and they glance toward their ears, or you see their eyes dart side to side, this used to be interpreted as someone who was being shady or shifty, but we now know that people who prefer to hear and speak, and that is how they retain information, they are glancing at their ears to hear or recall what they have heard, as well as creating in their ears and in their mind how it will sound as they describe to you or provide to you the answer to your question. If they glance down toward their hands or bring their hands up toward their eyes, these are people who prefer to be active in learning and use their hands quite frequently in what they do. And so they are physically manipulating their environment to come up with the response that they're going to provide to you. Again, this type of gesture has at times been misperceived as someone who is trying to come up with or create a lie or recall information that may not be there. For those who use their hands frequently, this is how they're going to recreate what they have felt or touched and built to build their response. Now, the eyes can give away when someone is perhaps speaking something that is not entirely true. This tends to be given away by the speed at which they are blinking. If their rate of blinking suddenly increases, oftentimes their body is nervous and they're blinking rapidly in order to be able to see the environment around them. And then their blood pressure may have actually increased in a biological fight or flight response. And as that occurs, it changes the biology of the eye and the stress within the eye, and their eyes may actually begin to dry out. And so they're trying to keep their eyes moist to be able to see what's going on. All of these are natural biological responses that occur without thinking about it. It is an unconscious response to the physical stress of what's going on. So if their eyes begin to rapidly flutter, if they do seem to be glancing not just up and down, but side to side and glancing around their environment, they may be feeling stressed, or they may be in a situation where what they're speaking may not be entirely true, and they're trying to keep track of all the details. Watch the shoulders. As you speak, pay attention to your own shoulders. Have you ever noticed when you get bad news, the first thing that happens is your shoulders tend to drop, your head comes forward, and you tend to slouch slightly? You've dropped yourself into a defensive position rather than an offensive position. By simply standing up, straightening your shoulders, and bringing your chin up, you've removed that biological negative response from flight, fear, and placed it back into a biological position of strength and response to the environment. Someone who may be struggling with what they're saying and whether or not it's exactly accurate will shrug, or you'll see a shoulder dip, which tends to be a biological response to dropping subconsciously back into that fight or flight mode of, I need to flee the situation, or I'm uncomfortable in the situation. As you watch the other person speaking, if they're uncomfortable, if they're unsure, their whole body may dip forward, and they'll need to be encouraged, like our parents used to tell us, sit up straight, raise their chin, and raise their confidence. Finally, pay attention to the hands. Verbal speakers tend to hold their hands still. Kinesthetic or visual speakers tend to talk with their hands. And cultures oftentimes will use their hands differently when speaking. Placement of hands can make a big difference in being misperceived. In Asian cultures, placing your hands in front of your face or above someone else's head is insulting. You're placing yourself above them. Oftentimes, the way that we hold our hands in hand positions with how they're crossed may be misperceived in other cultures. Even simple hand gestures for pointing can be misperceived. It was a great eye-opener to me. In most of the Southeast Asian cultures, point with the middle finger and give directions with this finger. And for someone raised in the American culture, the first time somebody gave me directions and pointed with the middle finger, it was a bit off-putting. But be aware that even the gestures you use with your hands may be misperceived based on the other culture. So watch what the person from the other culture is doing with their hands to make sure that you're mirroring what they're doing. One last thing to be aware of with nonverbal communication and your body stance and your eyes is that your whole body is going to be responding. Watch how the other person is responding and mirror their responses. In many cultures, it is considered impolite to look another person in the face. If it feels like they're constantly staring at your chin, as many cultures, native cultures will, look down slightly. If they're looking over your shoulder, as most Asian cultures will, look over their shoulder. It's considered impolite or offensive to look them in the eye because you're now holding yourself above them. However, in the American and the Western culture, if you're not looking them in the eye, then they tend to perceive that you may not be entirely forthright with them. But even at that, if you hold eye contact for too long, you can make the other person nervous. The first person to break eye contact is the one who may be perceived as not as confident, when in fact, if you are the first to break eye contact, you can control the nonverbal communication in the setting and can de-escalate someone who's becoming upset by breaking eye contact briefly and then looking back in their face and allowing them to look away and reconsider their thoughts. Again, be aware of what your body is doing. It is sending signals the whole time that you're speaking, even while sitting. I'm currently in a more formal position, even though you can't tell, with my shoulders up, legs are crossed, and sitting up straight, slouched, legs not crossed, showing the bottoms of my feet. Those would all be considered different stances that are nonverbal. So be aware of how your body position, what your eyes, shoulders, and hands are doing while speaking, and what the eyes, hands, and shoulders of the receiver are doing as well.